Hello and welcome to the CUFI UK podcast for Zion's sake. My name is Alastair. This is Alex.
Hello.
And in today's podcast, we discuss the abhorrent decision by the UK government to implement a partial arms embargo against Israel. It is disastrous for this nation. It is the wrong thing to do. And we discuss about why it's wrong for Britain, wrong for Israel, why it sends the wrong message to Hamas, and why it should be reversed, and how you can get involved in making your voice heard.
Yeah, we're also going to be looking at the situation where Hamas brutally murdered 6 Israeli hostages and why David Lammy's decision lacked moral clarity and was really a stab in the back of Israel as it mourned the loss of its hostages.
Plus, please let us know what you think by leaving your thoughts in the comments. Okay then, Alex, so we have some big issues to discuss today.
Yeah.
First of all, at the beginning of the week, we had very sad news about the murder of the 6 Israeli hostages.
Yep.
We were devastated, as were the whole of Israel and Jewish people around the world, and all of us as Christians that are standing with Israel at this time. These were 6 hostages that were taken on the 6th of October, held in captivity by Hamas for over 10 months. And whilst all hope, there'd been hope that they would be rescued by the IDF, very sadly, when the IDF arrived at the tunnel in Rafah, they were discovered to have been murdered by their captors.
Yeah.
And not only that, but they had been murdered, it would suggest, within perhaps a day or 2 days prior to being found.
Well, the latest on that is even that they were shot as the IDF were making their entry because Hamas spotted the IDF arriving.
Okay.
So literally shot in the back of the head. Obviously, this is a developing story. They're trying to work out the details of it. But the latest information is it sounds like they were literally killed as the IDF were entering the tunnel, or entering the area, which shows they were executed at point-blank range, bullet to the back of the head, a war crime.
Yes. Oh, 100%. And this comes, I think it was less than a mile away from where last week we were rejoicing at the rescue of the Israeli Arab that was held hostage by Hamas.
Yeah.
He was rescued and reunited with his family. And I think it just is a reminder of the roller coaster as observers about what is happening in Israel's fight against terror and the tragedy of the last 10 and a half, nearly 11 months.
Yeah.
But
I think as well, showing what you're saying there with the difference in emotion. I mean, when I can't remember his name, but when he was rescued last week, he was an Arab Israeli, dispelled all of the apartheid lie or the the anti-Semitic trope that Israel is sort of treating Arabs differently to Jews, that sort of thing. The whole of Israel celebrated that. There was literally, announcements being made on beaches and everyone cheering and celebrating because an Israeli had been saved. Likewise, this week, as the news broke, Israel was in a state of mourning because this really was like a gut-wrenching thing to happen. 6 Israelis were so close to being rescued.
Yes.
And then they were brutally murdered by Hamas at the last moment.
Yes. And look, our standing with Israel is in those times of rejoicing and the times of mourning, right?
Yeah.
Now, the Bible says, comfort ye, my people, saith God.
Yeah.
And so we want to comfort the Jewish people at this time. And we're here as Christians, standing united with Israel and the Jewish people through thick and through thin, through good times and through bad times. And so, of course, we're devastated about this news, but we're going to continue to pray for Israel's victory over Hamas and for the release and the rescuing of saving of all the Israeli hostages that remain held captive.
Yep.
And it should be noted again, this happened in Rafah. They were discovered in a tunnel in Rafah. just as last week the rescue of the other Israeli hostage. And I can't just help but draw some considerations, I think, to the fact that it was only a couple of months ago that the whole world was against Israel entering Rafah.
Yeah.
The whole world. I've got some quotes here. Before we came onto the podcast, I had a look because politicians internationally were saying to Israel, you must not enter Rafah. It will be catastrophic, right? And while the IDF did enter Rafah, it is in Rafah. It has been successful in uncovering miles and miles of tunnels. Of course, it has recovered bodies in Rafah. It has rescued hostages in Rafah. But, they were just so close to saving these 6 innocent Israeli victims.
Yeah.
Here we have, how about this? The EU President, Ursula von der Leyen, said Israel's planned Rafah invasion must be, quote, avoided at all costs. That is the head of the European Union. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, repeated that a large-scale Israeli offensive in Rafah must be prevented at all costs. Biden told CNN in May, if they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons. That is a direct quote. I'll say that again. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons. And he indicated that a red line as being attack on, quote, population centres in the city. The, quote, red line was something repeated by other journalists as well. Here in the UK, Britain's Foreign Minister David Cameron, at the time, said that Israel should not carry out an offensive in the Gazan city of Rafah without a clear plan to protect civilians there. Well, okay, that's somewhat milder, okay, to the other statements. But again, remember at that time, there was a lot of pressure by UK government for Israel not to enter Rafah. And then, of course, Kamala Harris, she told ABC News in March, quote, we have been clear in multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake. Let me tell you something. I have been studying the maps.
Well, I'm glad someone has.
She also said that she would not rule out, quote, consequences if Israel pushed forward. Right? This week, Kamala Harris was giving her full backing for Israel and their defense. Yet, just a few months ago, she said that she couldn't rule out that there would be consequences if Israel entered Rafah.
Yeah.
Well, this week, Israel in Rafah discovered 6 bodies that had been shot moments before being rescued.
Yeah.
Okay, this is complete hypocrisy. And we were saying it at the time that we must get fully behind Israel in what they need to do in Rafah. So, yeah, I think it highlights and it demonstrates very sadly, and it's sad that it's had to be proven, but they were wrong.
Exactly. And they were wrong on a number of levels, by the way. A lot of those accusations there were literally saying it will be a humanitarian disaster, there would be tens of thousands of Palestinians dying, all these different things. And actually, Israel has proven every single one of their doubters wrong. Okay, the fanatics out there are still going to accuse Israel of genocide and all the rest of it, but ultimately, Israel's managed to go into a heavily populated area, and effectively, I think last week it was announced that they have eradicated, the operational capabilities of Hamas in Rafah. Obviously, there's still going to be some terrorists hiding in tunnels with hostages, as is what the case is, but they're unable to actually carry out attacks from Rafah anymore. They've taken the Philadelphia corridor, which means they've got full access. This is Israel, I should say. They've got full access across the Gaza-Egypt border, and therefore they can stop weapons and, weapons coming into Gaza and people getting out of Gaza, that kind of thing. So operationally, it's been very effective for Israel. They've managed to move people out as needed. They've managed to, carry out strategic attacks on Hamas and take out vital infrastructure of the terrorist organization. And they've proven all their doubters wrong. But I think, looking back at those quotes when everyone was saying Rafah was a red line. Everyone was saying it was a humanitarian catastrophe, all the rest of it. Israel proved them wrong. At this time, we're looking at it saying, well, actually, Israel's in a fairly positive position. Okay, they've lost 6 hostages. Militarily, though, they're in a very positive position. There's few Palestinian deaths at the moment happening. Israel's combatant to civilian ratios are getting even better, basically. There's less deaths per day, that kind of thing. They're managing to get aid into Gaza. They're crushing all the lies, all the they're dispelling it all. And yet, as they're doing this, the UK has actually made a decision which goes against what is happening on the ground.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that in a minute. But one thing I thought was interesting, when you mentioned the David Cameron quote, I remember at the time there was actually widespread outrage against David Cameron because he suggested that if they went into Rafah, that the UK could carry out an arms embargo against them. You remember that?
Yes.
And actually, he made that threat and then he walked it back very quickly because I think he was just sort of putting out the idea sort of thing and saying, if things go really bad, there could be an arms embargo. He then walked it back because, politically it was a bad move to make.
Yes.
And then this week,
yes,
as Israel is burying its dead, as the whole nation is mourning, we get the terrible news from David Lammy, our current Foreign Secretary.
Yes.
Labour government have decided to suspend a number of arms sales to Israel.
Yes. And shall we talk about that now?
I think we'll move
because
into
the timing of it. Well, let's just we're going to talk about why it's wrong, but let's just focus on that very issue. The timing of it was shocking. I mean, as you say, here was Israel mourning, and they were mourning. I mean, we have to remember that, of course, it is the custom in Judaism for burials to happen very quickly.
Yeah.
And so the bodies were discovered on Saturday. Burials were still taking place on Monday. And yet at that moment, our UK Foreign Secretary announced that the UK would be suspending 30 out of 350 arms contracts with Israel. So that means companies that are trading with Israel on military weapons and other military faculties, those contracts would be effectively banned. 30, they were handpicked. It'd be interesting to know a bit more about what those contracts pertain. But before we go into why it's completely wrong, what a complete offense. What a signal that it sends to Hamas, that at this time, when the full weight of condemnation should have been against Hamas, and the moment when all eyes were focused on the funerals of those innocent 6 Israelis, and political condemnation should have been levied against Hamas, instead the UK does perhaps the most anti-Israel act that any recent government has made.
Oh, it is by far, exactly. It's by far the most anti-Israel act that a UK government has made in recent years.
Yeah.
And like you said, the timing of it could not have been worse. Do you want to know how bad it is? The UN, after 11 months, the UN has never once condemned Hamas, right?
Yes.
They very rarely accuse Hamas of war crimes, while at the same time not only accusing Israel of war crimes, but voting in favor of condemning Israel for war crimes, right? After 11 months, the United Nations Security Council is actually going to convene about Hamas's war crimes. Why? Because the 6 innocent Israelis that were murdered at the hands of Hamas was enough for the UN to finally get it through their thick skulls that Hamas is committing war crimes. And yet, for the UK, the reaction was the absolute opposite. It was to literally stab Israel in the back as it was mourning their dead. And it is the most anti-Israel, and it is, I'm sorry to say, it is the most idiotic decision our government could have ever made.
Yes.
In terms of not just the fact that the decision is bad, but the fact that they timed it for that day.
Yes.
And actually, there are reports that David Lammy made the decision on Saturday as the news was breaking.
Yes.
So he made the
What
decision.
was he thinking?
I know.
No. What planet
Yeah.
is our foreign secretary on?
I know.
And, we're concerned on a number of levels, not just because, I mean, this isn't going to affect Israel largely militarily. I think if the number of contracts were to be increased, then perhaps that would be a larger dent. But it certainly does affect the relationship between the UK and Israel.
Absolutely.
It dangers it to a very, very serious level, of which I think we, the UK, are more vulnerable because we depend upon Israel's generosity and coordination to help us in our national security, both through cyber intelligence, sharing of intelligence information, and other military ways. And the US is very shocked about the decision that the UK has made. But this really does set a wedge. And on a spiritual level, I think that is the biggest threat for our nation, because the Bible says that God blesses those that bless the nation of Israel, curses those that curses the nation of Israel. May God's mercy be upon this country.
Yeah.
But I have to say that this current Labour government has positioned Great Britain in uncharted territory, and we do not know what the future holds because of this decision.
Yeah.
And this might be a testing of the water. There have been, ironically, those who have criticised the Labour government for not doing more. So whilst we're quite unhappy, very unhappy, there are those who are saying, well, actually, you can't really be 8.5% anti-Israel.
Yeah.
I did the maths.
Right.
Okay. We're 8.5%, we need to be 100% anti-Israel, right? So they got those pressures. So why do this, what would seem to be like a token move? And I think it is to send messages to those who are opposed to Israel.
Yeah.
It's to send a message to Israel.
Yep.
It indirectly also sends a massive message to Hamas, to the United Nations, to others who are perhaps at this time also other countries who are contemplating their own relations with Israel.
Yeah.
It fuels the animosity. It places the Jewish community at a greater vulnerable position, more so than it already is. It adds a wave of anti-Israel sentiment in this country. It brings a complete confusion of moral clarity in this country in terms of how we treat Israel.
Yep.
And so I think it's a testing of the waters. I would not be surprised that if the current government is allowed to get away with it, then we will see other anti-Israel motions passed.
Yeah.
On exactly the same day, right? Exactly the same time, almost to the hour that David Lammy made this announcement, Jeremy Corbyn, not a friend of Hamas or Hezbollah, and 4 other anti-Israel MPs formed a new coalition, and they share the same purpose of basically wanting a full arms embargo against Israel. So they formed a new alliance called the Independence Alliance.
Yep.
And I think on another podcast we will perhaps cover that alliance a bit more, because there are some very interesting fellows in that group who share Corbyn's worldview.
Of Hamas, maybe.
of Hamas, maybe. Yeah. But look, I'm going to ask for a photo just to be put on the screen. Okay. This photo that you'll see on your screen is of a premises in London or somewhere in the United Kingdom that is apparently providing arms to Israel. This building was defaced with red paint. It's not the first instance, but as you will see, graphically covered entirely in red paint by anti-Israel protesters the morning after David Lammy's announcement.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you fail to stand up to terror, when you fail to stand up in support of Israel. because you then fuel the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic hatred, and you get these, whoever they are, okay, making their own version of anti-Israel policy by throwing paint and damaging premises.
Yeah. And I think with that, it's one of those things where for many months, if not years, there's been groups like Palestine Action and other groups who have actually been carrying out criminal damage against organizations who, make, arms manufacturers and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the government hasn't been doing enough, the previous government and this government. But obviously, we've got people in prison at the moment who are in prison for inciting violence. Well,
yes.
Surely the government is inciting hatred right now with this decision. I mean, with our letter that we've got a letter writing campaign, which we'll talk about a bit later, we are emphasizing to the government that their actions will fuel anti-Semitic hatred on the streets of London, that their actions will fuel anti-Israel activity on the streets of London, or on British streets, I should say. And it's this sort of thing where this decision it doesn't help anyone. And I think going back to some of the points you made, David Lammy was trying to sort of say, maybe it wasn't David Lammy, I think another minister was sort of saying, well, actually, this isn't really going to affect Israel too much. It's just sort of a nominal amount of things. It's, not going to affect their capabilities. And it's like, well, then why are you doing it?
Yeah.
What's the actual reason? Because you've definitely upset Israel. You've definitely upset the US, and I'll mention why in a minute. You've upset your pro-Israel supporters here in the UK, or people who are pro-Israel in the UK. You've upset people who are anti-Israel because they want you to actually do far more than this. It's like they've not won anybody over, and at the same time they've weakened the UK, because bearing in mind an arms embargo means Israel's not going to be buying from the UK. So at a time where they're saying, we're going to have to make tough changes and, the budget and this and the other, we're also going to remove our ability to make money from our foreign, from our military sales to Israel. It's like they're making a lot of moves which don't seem to add up there.
Can I also just say on a policy, on the actual wording as well of it, because the reason they say that the partial arms embargo has been enforced is because they're concerned that Israel might use them to breach international humanitarian law. Might. Now, I just want to focus on that word might. Okay. That is a bit like me not selling you a car in case you speed in it.
Yeah, exactly. Because you might speed in it.
Because you might speed in it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sell you the car.
Yeah.
Okay, you might break the law with it. So I'm not going to send it to you. Now, that is how flawed that principle is.
Yeah.
Okay. Had Israel committed international crimes, then that might make a little bit more sense. But the fact is that Israel has not committed war crimes. And so that is, I think, a really important...
It's not even about war crimes, by the way. It's not even about international law. It's about international humanitarian law.
Well, yes.
So they're even emphasizing the humanitarian
side. They say
side
humanitarian.
So it's not even...
But the enemies of Israel, those who are opposed to Israel on social media and in the media, are not saying humanitarian.
No. Yeah.
They're using it.
They're using words like war crimes.
They're using war crimes, basically.
Yeah.
And so it just shows again that, and I was going to say, it's quite an important principle to understand, that one thing it is now revealed is that David Lammy has succumbed to these accusations leveled against Israel for the last 11 months in Westminster, in the media, in the international courts, on social media. These lies which are accusing Israel of committing of breaking international law. That is what is sort of in the background of this decision. The fact they might do.
Yeah.
Well, they're not.
Yeah, I know. And it's the false accusations which have, piled up and pushed forward this decision, and he's clearly made the decision without they don't have like definitive proof. There's not been any I know there has been sort of a document that's been put together, but it's still a questionable document. I mean, even the previous Conservative government said that actually it's similar to what we were advised on and we didn't make that decision, and they've obviously come out saying against it. I mean, one of the things to show how this actually has damaged the Israel-UK relationship and the UK-US relationship is this is actually a tweet from Robert Peston, who's the ITV guy.
He's a journalist.
He's a journalist, yeah. And me and you actually, when we were on the flight a few weeks back going to Washington, I remember seeing him on the BA advert, and I said to you, I wasn't so keen on how he delivered one of his lines within this commercial, and so we're having a chat about it. Well, quite happy how he's delivered this line, because what he's saying is he's saying
that was the safety briefing.
That was a safety briefing.
Yeah,
on the BA
I think I remember that.
Yeah. Well, that's how I remember Peston. I was like, it's that guy on the plane. Yeah. So anyway,
I thought you were going to say you saw him on the plane.
No.
And I thought
we got off topic. Anyway, we'll get back on it. But anyway, he wrote saying Washington sources tell him the White House feels let down by Starmer's and Lammy's decision to revoke licenses for the export of military equipment to Israel. And he said, quote, "They assured us they wouldn't do this," said one of them. I mean, I think the whole UK is probably, I'd say, I think America is experiencing what the whole of the UK is experiencing at the moment, which is they keep telling us something, assuring us they're not going to do it, and then actually doing it.
Yeah.
And I think as well, like, look at some of the anti-Israel decisions they've made. They've reinstated funding to UNRWA, which is infested by Hamas.
Yes.
There's not been any, independent groups have actually looked at UNRWA and said there is a problem with UNRWA. Until it is reformed, don't give them any money. And yet the Labour government has decided just to give them millions and millions of taxpayer money.
Yeah.
They've said that they would arrest Netanyahu if the ICC.
No, they actually said that they won't prevent the arrest.
Yeah, they won't prevent the ICC. They won't prevent the ICC issuing the arrest warrant. Therefore, they will abide by it.
Yes.
So therefore, they will arrest Netanyahu if the ICC applies that law, which is crazy to even say that. It is just shameful that we would even have that kind of thing. Like, the ICC is only meant to have the ability to invoke its powers against countries that have agreed to it, and Israel has never agreed to it. The US has never agreed to it. Russia's never agreed to it. And, it's sort of, anyway, that's another topic for another day. But going back to what the Labour government has done, for example, David Lammy, when he met with the Palestinian Prime Minister, he met with him just moments, an hour or two after meeting with Israeli leaders, and he actually took off his pin badge, which was basically the yellow pin badge to, bring the hostages home.
Okay.
So while he was in Israel, he was there, bring the hostages home. When he goes to speak to a leader of the Palestinians who probably has some influence over that, or at least some, help with it, he takes his pin badge off and doesn't even mention them. So, of course, when you do that sort of thing, maybe you are going to stab Israel in the back when their hostages are, I just think there's a number of things which the government has done which are just not good.
A number of things. In addition to, and this is the previous government as well, we must acknowledge this, but also failure over the last few months to really give any robust prosecution to the calling for intifada, the calling for the death of Jews on the streets of Britain.
Yeah.
That has been very weak. I mean, you consider the barrier which has been raised over the last few weeks in relation to hate speech and disorder. It is incredible that you can get away with supporting Hamas on the streets of Britain and calling for the destruction of Israel and for the death of Jews and get away with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they've thrown people in jail for far lesser charges than what we've seen being orchestrated against the Jewish community, against Israel. And I think there's just a lot of things wrong with what is going on at the moment. Yeah, but going back to what you were saying before about how throughout many months, different organizations, bodies, the UN, the EU, our own government, even America, they're all saying these things, telling Israel not to do this, not to do that, not to do the other. We've seen that time and time again with pretty much everything about Gaza. And I think, one of the things is the talk of famine in Gaza, deaths because of starvation and so forth. They have not actually amounted to anything.
No.
Back in February, around the time when they were saying don't go into Rafah, the UN was coming out putting Gaza on like the list of countries that were going to have the most starvation and all this stuff. And actually, I think it's those sorts of false accusations and hysterical sort of accusations that have come out against Israel. The same when it comes to genocide, where they keep saying Israel's carrying out a genocide, Israel's committing war crimes, all these things. What I think happens is this is like adding to the mounting pressure on politicians. Politicians obviously aren't as switched on and tuned in as they should be on these topics because they're dealing with lots and lots of different issues around the world. Unfortunately, when it comes to the UK, the Foreign Office is unfortunately infested with anti-Israel people with an agenda that is against Israel. We've known that for many years. When it comes, for example, they took a long time to even ban Hamas, for example. And so they won't ban the IRGC. They think Iran is, a partner for peace and all this stuff. It's basically hampering our ability to properly think about these subjects and deal with them.
I was listening to William Hague the other day, former leader, in fact, of the Conservative Party. He said that the Foreign Office usually receives 3 recommendations from the civil service, and they normally choose one of the 3.
Right, okay.
One is do nothing. The other one is the more extreme action, and then there's always a middle one. So he said when he was in office, the civil service would always provide the Foreign Secretary with basically 3 choices,
right, and
what the consequences would be. 3. It makes you wonder which of the 3. I mean, clearly, David Lammy didn't choose option 1, do nothing.
Yeah,
it makes you wonder what the third option was, if it was the 30, or whether or not it was all or what.
Yeah,
but it's just interesting to have that bit of insight.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and the thing is, like, now that the UK has actually carried out this arms embargo, and it's a partial arms embargo, not a full arms embargo, but it joins a list of countries that the UK has an arms embargo of some sort against. Those countries are countries like Russia, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon. Like, these are the sort of people you would expect to have arms embargoes against. Afghanistan, it's run by the Taliban.
Yes.
You're not going to be giving arms to them. Syria,
you'd hope not.
Well, yeah. Well, I say that. I mean, there was a report the other week that the US had accidentally sent something like $300 million to Afghanistan by mistake.
Yeah.
And they obviously left them with a
left a few things there.
They left a military might, which puts Afghanistan or the Taliban as one of the strongest militaries in the entire world, because I think they left something like $60 or $70 billion worth of equipment, including helicopters and tanks and everything. So anyway,
I didn't know it was going to go there. But okay.
We're sort of getting off topic on that as well, but it's fine. But I think what I'm trying to say is, like, when you look at these things happening around the world, I mean, we've put arms embargoes against these countries because they're carrying out proper war crimes. They're actually doing things which are bad, and therefore we have these consequences. But then you look at allies of the UK which have been accused of war crimes. For example, Saudi Arabia. And I always use this example with people who've listened to the podcast a few times. I always talk about Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the fact that, over 300,000 people were killed in Yemen, 85,000 children starved to death over a 3-year period between 2015 and 2018. The list goes on. At that time, there were, organizations, NGOs calling for arms embargoes on Saudi Arabia. Did the UK do that? No, they carried on giving weapons to Saudi Arabia. When the UK was in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were UN debates about the UK committing war crimes. There were, calls by NGOs accusing the UK and the US of war crimes. there were far more people that died in Iraq and Afghanistan than have died in Gaza, right?
Yeah.
More people died, in Yemen from Saudi Arabia's attacks than all the wars between Israel and its enemies since Israel's rebirth, right? And yet the country that has the arms embargo against it, even though it's an ally, is Israel. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I know what you're getting at. I think the Bible, the description, the cup of drunkenness, is perhaps one explanation for why there is such a confusion and an obsession.
Yeah.
And why there are those in the West who see Israel as a problem. And I think that is how they see it. I think they see it as a problem. There are obviously figures and voices who are vehemently against Israel.
Yeah.
And some of that crosses into an anti-Semitic feeling. But I think just generally this whole antagonism, this whole sort of feeling that Israel isn't allowed to defeat Hamas, it's not allowed to go into Rafah, it's not allowed to defend itself, it's not allowed to protect its borders or its people or its holy sites or even name its holy sites in Hebrew.
Yeah, I know.
Right? They're not
or even
allowed.
Pray at their holy sites.
They're not allowed. We have, that. It's like Israel is just a problem. It would just be easier, and I'm talking rhetorically here.
Yeah.
But it would be easy if it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that is actually that is the very worrying underlying sentiment, which is sort of amplified by these kind of decisions, I think.
Exactly. And this is the thing. I mean, when there are protesters on the streets of London calling for the destruction of Israel, literally, they're calling from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Corbyn and his four, independent
Musketeers.
alliance, Musketeer, whatever. I was going to say minions, but I didn't mean that. But that group of five.
That discredits minions.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
But the thing is, that group of five, so they want Israel's erasure. They want Israel to not exist anymore. And actually, it's interesting you sort of said that thing, because that is what they want. And I think it calls into question, we've questioned, obviously, the morals of the UK government and their stand with Israel.
Integrity.
Yeah, integrity. And I think it does really call into question, what is their end game here? Because I think a lot of people are probably feeling, or at least I'm feeling, I should say, that the Labour government under Starmer branded itself as a changed, reformed Labour Party that was no longer for the Corbynistas. It was no longer an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic party. They wiped out anti-Semitism, and yet they are elected as appearing to be fairly centrist, and then they seem to have taken a massive sort of swing to the left in a lot of different areas, not just about Israel, but obviously particularly that's what we're talking about. And actually, when I was listening to Lammy announce this arms embargo, and he said the words that he is now, his decision was to advance the cause of peace. And actually, as he said that, I had that same thought, which was, what is his intention? Is it to weaken Israel to the point where they can't defend themselves, to allow Iran to win and they get wiped out? Will that be the peace that they're looking for? Because that's honestly what Corbyn says. He says once Israel is Palestine, there will be peace, because Israel is the cause of all the problems in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And the radical Islamists say, well, actually, Israel is the problem of all the problems Israel's the cause of all the problems in the world.
How does it advance? How does it advance peace?
I know.
I mean,
by weakening Israel's ability to defend itself from 7 different fronts of war. An Iranian regime that's trying to wipe out. Israel's enemies are Britain's enemies.
Yes, 100%.
It does not advance peace to weaken your allies and to weaken the people defending you.
No, and that is not how you treat an ally.
No,
as you rightly pointed out, that is how you treat your enemies.
Yeah,
that is how you treat the Taliban.
Yeah,
that is how you. Well, that is.
Well,
how
we don't
you
even treat Hamas that way, because they've given Hamas money and taken ability away from
It's
Israel.
completely messed up, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that is how you treat your enemy. It's not how you treat your allies. You treat your allies better, because actually your allies, you want to support them in their defense, but also they're going to support you. Israel is going to support us. And you're absolutely right. Israel's enemies are our enemies.
Yep.
The UK's enemies. And I think, that is very worrying. And if it isn't to limit Israel tactically, although I do believe that it is.
Of course, yeah.
It could also be perceived to be some form of punishment, a whack across the knuckles. Why? Well, there's a lot of accusations right now in terms of Israel not agreeing to a ceasefire, which is actually wrong.
Yep.
Because multiple times now, Israel has agreed to a ceasefire, and Hamas has point blank refused.
Yeah.
So actually, instead of pointing the blame upon Hamas, and let's be absolutely categorically clear here, I don't know if you can hear, but there's fighter jet
flying over our head.
Flying over our head. Yes, so pray that they all defending Israel.
Yep.
Right. Let's make it categorically clear, right, that all blame for the welfare of the hostages and for the murder of those 6 hostages should be on Hamas.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
They are the ones. And by the way, I mean, even going back to that the UN Security Council now having a discussion, did Hamas commit war crimes? Well, let me just point out here, Israel has done an investigation. They're quite clear that Hamas murdered the 6 hostages, right? Hamas have actually come out and said, yeah, we murdered them, and we'll murder other ones if you try and rescue more. By the way, holding hostages is a war crime. It's it's like you don't have to kill them for it to be a war crime, but killing them is also a war crime.
Yeah.
I mean, Hamas has openly admitted to committing war crimes. The UN has never ever actually accused or even voted any resolution to condemn Hamas. Hopefully this week they'll actually condemn Hamas for the first time. We wait to see if that will actually happen. But what I'm trying to say is it's sort of like they're just not even using their brains, when dealing with these terrorists. And actually, it goes back to these sort of negotiations that we're talking about. Every single time Israel is blamed, there was an interview, we were talking about it before the podcast, where Douglas Murray was being interviewed by Piers Morgan. And Piers Morgan was sort of putting there, why is Netanyahu continually refusing, to negotiate a ceasefire? And Douglas Murray sort of fired back to him and said, well, why is you're wrongly putting the emphasis on Netanyahu. It's Hamas. Hamas were the ones who invaded. Hamas were the ones who murdered over 1,100, now coming up to 1,200 Israelis. Hamas were the ones who are still holding hostages. They could have released them back in October and this whole war wouldn't have even happened. It's sort of all the emphasis has been put on Israel and on Netanyahu.
Absolutely.
And, and actually the emphasis should be put onto to Hamas. And sorry, if you can hear, there are sort of fighter jets doing some manoeuvres over our office. We're not sure why.
There are fighter jets
so we do
encircling, protecting the CUFI offices,
there you go.
Which we'd like to thank the UK military for.
Because we are near a few air bases. So, happens regularly.
Yes.
So,
So, no, I agree. We've expressed our views, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
We'd be very interested to know the views of those who are listening and watching, and there is an opportunity if you are listening to this on YouTube, please tell us what you think. Tell us what you think about the UK's decision to suspend 30 arms contracts with Israel. Tell us, what do you think David Lammy is even thinking? What's the long-term goal? What do you think Britain should do now about it? Just tell us what you think. And we would love to read your comments. We're going to read a few comments shortly. But first of all, I think it has to be said, and it's a very important thing we do mention, that we can take action.
Yep.
So we're not just sitting here talking about it and having a grumble, you and me. We can do that any day of the week.
Yep.
We are wanting to make a difference here at CUFI, right? We are wanting to make our voices heard. And so we have launched a campaign that is calling for the UK Foreign Secretary to reverse the decision which has been made.
Yep.
That's the practical goal of this campaign, but actually we need to express our disgust, our unhappiness at the decision which has been made, why it is wrong, and it's really important that our members of parliament hear the feeling that we hold.
Yeah.
So our campaign, if you visit our website at www.cufi.org.uk and follow the link for the new campaign, you will see a picture of David Lammy and you will see an action button. Please visit that. We'll provide the link as well in the description so you can go directly to that page. We have written a letter that we are inviting you to use. You can edit the wording if you would like to, but we've actually put the wording together. So it is really easy to enter your details, enter your postcode. It will automatically find your member of parliament. It will send it, and it asks the MP to forward the letter to the Foreign Secretary. Now, it is parliamentary protocol for the MP. They must forward your letter to the Foreign Secretary. They have a responsibility and duty within law to do that. So you are informing your MP of your feelings, but you're also asking them to pass it on to the Foreign Secretary. This is a really, really important time that we do this. And so please do participate and, yes, get involved. And we have to make a stand, Alex.
I agree completely.
So I hope that we're giving CUFI supporters that opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a couple of things to sort of note there. I think you've sort of said everything that needs to be said, but I think it is important to re-emphasize that when people are contacting their MP and then it is then being forwarded to the Foreign Office, what that actually is doing is it means every single MP is receiving emails from CUFI supporters, because fortunately we have enough people to actually, help reach every single politician, which is great. But it also then puts every single one of those individual emails into the hands of the Foreign Office, and it sort of does a double effect there. And like you said, by law, the MP has to forward it on if you have requested it. So that's what the letter does. Second of all, we do have a lot of people saying, well, my MP is anti-Israel, I'm not going to bother. Or, well, my MP doesn't respond anyway. Well, it doesn't really matter, actually, because, well, it does matter, obviously. But what really matters is just getting your voice heard by your MP. Because actually, we've seen anti-Israel MPs becoming more mellow in their attacks on Israel when they've been receiving lots of emails from CUFI supporters.
Yes.
We've seen pro-Israel MPs becoming more galvanized. We've seen nominal MPs turning more pro-Israel. So it does make a difference. And I think I just want to re-emphasize that. It takes some courage to actually do this. Obviously, your MP is going to know who you are after this. But, nothing bad is going to happen. The only thing that can happen is positive, and that is that your MP will realize, hang on a second, there's a constituent here who supports Israel. And if there are, several, maybe even, 100 plus people who are, because obviously there's 650 MPs out there, we do send, thousands of emails to MPs. So it is.
So every MP will hear.
Yeah, every single MP will hear from a CUFI supporter. Most MPs will hear from, multiple CUFI supporters. We do have people from all over the UK who support CUFI, and it just really is important. And this is probably our most important campaign because right now, we're dealing with a government that is opposing our views.
And it could be the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. And if they don't get backlash now, if they think that they're on the right page, we could be seeing even worse things happen.
100%.
Yeah.
And we are, how many months in now?
Month.
It feels like a month. Around 2 months.
Yeah.
In a 4 to 5 year period under the current government. And it should be pointed out, we are CUFI, we are not party political.
Yep.
But we are, of course, have to express our opposition without mincing our words when it comes to Israel.
Yeah, exactly.
On this policy, because this is what we're about. We want to stand for truth, and so please do help us by trying to make a big as impact as possible. They're hearing from various pro-Palestinian lobby groups. They need to hear the other side, but most importantly, they need to hear the truth.
Yep.
It does sound a little bit like Swindon is under attack at the moment with all the planes which are flying over us, and we'll probably leave the building and find out that David Lammy is boycotting Swindon. But yes, we're going to go to an advert and then we're going to read the comments. We are pleased to announce that the 2024 to 2025 calendar from Christians United for Israel UK is now available to purchase. The title for this year's calendar is The Beauty of Zion. Israel is beautiful, and the Bible paints vivid images in our minds through the emotive words used to describe this land of promise. We hope you can experience the beauty of Zion as you make use of the calendar throughout the year. The calendar includes 16 stunning images of Israel with selected inspirational scriptures to help focus your prayers for God's chosen people and their land. The calendar also includes UK Christian and Jewish holidays for the 16 months and includes weekly Torah portions. Plus, we also offer a special bundle discount for adding a mug and greeting cards to the calendar. By purchasing a calendar or one of our gift bundles, you are supporting the work of CUFI in standing for Israel in the UK. Go to store.cufi.org.uk. So now to the comments.
Yep.
We've invited everyone to please leave your comments to this podcast on the if you're watching on YouTube, or indeed if you have discovered this podcast via our Facebook page, because we do read your comments on there as well. And one of those comments, this has begun in the last podcast, and in the last podcast we were covering the story about the rescuing of the Israeli Arab man from Gaza. Diana says, Israel is a living example of coexistence. Jews, Muslims, Arabs, Christians. All types of people live together in harmony. Why isn't this diversity seen in Arab societies?
Interesting.
I think that's a very good point. And highlights definitely the thing which I think is often overlooked and Israel does not get credit for is the fact that there is harmony between different groups. And that makes Israel unique in the Middle East. Because very sadly, in many of these Arab societies, Jews are not able to live safely and securely,
and neither are Christians,
and neither are Christians.
So
very good point. So, moving on to the comments on YouTube regarding the same podcast. Remember, there are multiple platforms you can listen to this podcast. Ruth says, "You speak on important issues to me. My father was an English Christian Zionist, so putting right and reversing the lack of truth in our media news is so good, and I thank you for helping me hear the truth as I now rely on your podcasts more than the news in our country, and the way the public is being hoodwinked is terrible. God save our nation from lies. Show us you are the God of Israel. For your name's sake, save your people. Amen." And then she closes, "Keep up the good work, CUFI." Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for your encouragement. We are very blessed to be doing what we're doing, and we want to thank you for your support and for everyone else who's listening to this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've got a few comments actually from the Justin Welby issue we did, because there's still some comments coming in.
Yes, that was three podcasts ago.
A couple of weeks ago. And so, there's some comments there. And actually, we've had a gentleman say that he's actually left the Anglican Church now.
Yeah, he's a reverend.
Yeah, that's right. So he said, "I've gone, dudes." So I always like being called a dude, by the way. He said, "I've gone, dudes. I've left the Anglican Church. I ain't being around that sellout nonsense. If Welby can sell out Israel, what else is the man capable of? God bless." And that's true. And I think it's one of those things where, people have to weigh up their association with different churches and things. There's some argument to be said of staying in the church and trying to reform it. Or there's another argument saying, actually, you don't want these people over you who are preaching things that go contrary to the Bible. So I think it's definitely something to pray about and to think about.
And God has the lead in that decision, definitely.
100%.
If God is showing you that it's time to come out, then so be it. May the Lord help you in that decision making. I think he makes a very good point, though, in terms of if what else. And I think if the church had been bolder, the established church had been bolder previously over the last 12 months, then I think it almost is like a national consciousness. Conscience, I should say. It's like a national conscience. If you go against the established church politically, even though there's a separation of church and state politically, the church can have an influence. And yet if the church is like leading the way in turning against Israel, then actually that is a very, very bad temperature reading of the climate of this country. The church, if anything, if politicians are making bad decisions, like the foreign secretary, the church should be at odds.
Yes.
The church should be the unpopular voice. The voice of dissent. But instead, is not only in agreement, but as Justin Welby's comments over the last few months they have been very much leading the narrative. That is very, very, very disturbing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of Christians who, when you talk to a politician, they will say, the Christians agree with us because they've got Justin Welby on their side. Well, actually, the majority of Christians are Bible-believing Christians and actually go against...
And does not reflect the church.
It does
God is building his church. And that's the people of God. That's the people who have placed their trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. That's the church. And he's building his church. And the Bible says that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But may we be found to be faithful as believers. And I think if any Jewish people listening, watching this, please, I hope this message will come across clear that there are those who are doing things in the name of Christianity and in the name of the church that do not represent the tens of thousands of Christians in this country who actually...
millions of Christians, I'd say.
Well, yes, but look, millions of Christians in this country who have... who do not agree with what the leader of the Church of England is advocating and are at odds with it. So,
and I'd say actually some of our supporters sort of highlight that. Another comment says he's the wolf in sheep's clothing that we were warned about. And another said that they signed a petition to have him removed, Justin Welby removed, as leader of the Church of England and peacefully protest to have it delivered to the head of the CUFI. So it's that sort of thing, where people are, people are against what Justin Welby is doing, and rightly so, because he's going against the Bible. And it doesn't matter who you are, what position you hold on earth. It doesn't matter who you please politically. If you are not pleasing God, you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think on that note, it's time to say goodbye. But thank you very much for listening and watching this podcast. Don't forget, please participate in our campaign, writing to your MP, telling David Lammy. You mentioned about sheep in a wolf in sheep clothing. Well, David Lammy can't pull the wool over our eyes.
And let us know your thoughts on David Lammy and the UK government as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Leave your comments, please. And of course, there are ways to support CUFI in various ways, not least by making a donation to the work of CUFI UK. Please go to www.cufi.org.uk/donate. Every gift that is made to the work of CUFI is very much appreciated and is necessary if we are to make a strong, bold stand for Israel in this nation. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your prayers. Let's continue to stand with Israel for Zion's sake. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Bye-bye.